Airline staff humiliates black woman, unaware she's a top executive in the industry. Have you ever witnessed a moment of blatant disrespect, only for fate to flip the script in the most dramatic way possible? Today's story is exactly that, and then some. It's a tale of arrogance, racial bias, and an unshakable spirit. Picture a bustling American Airlines check-in counter at John F. Kennedy International Airport, where the lines are long, tempers are high, and one unassuming passenger becomes the target of vicious humiliation. Little do the staff know, this passenger isn't just any traveler. She's a high-powered executive whose influence could change their futures forever. Buckle up, this story is a roller coaster you won't forget. Ebony Williams was born in a modest neighborhood in Atlanta, Georgia. Her mother, Regina, was a hard-working nurse who pulled double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital, while her father, Leonard, worked at a local auto shop doing brake replacements and oil changes. Neither of her parents had gone to college, and they had no background in aviation or the corporate world. Yet they instilled in Ebony a fierce sense of determination, integrity, and compassion, characteristics that would come to define her. From an early age, Ebony found herself mesmerized by the sky. Every time she heard the roar of an airplane overhead, she would dash outside, eyes shining, tracking its graceful arc across the clouds. She would often run to the end of her block, arms spread wide, mimicking the plane's ascent. The neighborhood kids laughed, but Ebony didn't care. It felt like freedom to her, freedom from the constraints of life, from the modesty of her surroundings, and freedom to dream bigger than anyone around her dared. By the time Ebony reached high school, her passion was clear to everyone. She obsessed over flight mechanics, aircraft models, airline business strategies, anything to do with aviation. She joined the school's science club, took advanced physics, and even volunteered on weekends to help in a local aviation museum. Her teachers took note, often remarking that they had never met someone so genuinely passionate about the airline industry. She was a beacon of ambition in a school where many of her classmates struggled just to see a future beyond the confines of their neighborhood. When Ebony was in 11th grade, she heard about a summer internship program at the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The program only accepted a handful of high school students each year, giving them a rare glimpse behind the scenes of one of the world's busiest airports. Determined to succeed, Ebony poured her heart into her application essay, writing about her dream to someday help manage an airline that truly cared for its passengers and its employees. She believed in elevating the standard of service, especially for marginalized communities who sometimes felt invisible or mistreated in large corporate environments. She was overjoyed when she received a letter of acceptance. That summer, Ebony spent her days shadowing different airline employees. She learned about ramp operations, safety inspections, passenger services, and even scheduling. Most of all, she discovered just how massive and complex the airline industry was. Each day ignited a new spark in her, fueling her desire to climb higher, learn more, and eventually lead. The biggest game changer, however, was a brief chat with one of the few black female executives she encountered in the airport's administration offices. This woman, Dr. Monica Floyd, oversaw a small department dealing with diversity training and inclusive hiring. She was a tall, confident figure, her presence commanding the entire room. Dr. Floyd spoke to Ebony not just about career paths, but also about the obstacles she would face as a black woman climbing the corporate ladder. She warned Ebony that the higher she soared, the more resistance she might encounter stereotypes, systemic bias, and the constant pressure to outperform. But she also encouraged Ebony to never let that deter her from claiming her rightful seat at the table. By the time Ebony entered her senior year of high school, she was unstoppable. She earned a scholarship to Georgia State University, choosing to major in business administration with a minor in aviation management. Her parents couldn't have been prouder. They watched as their once shy, starry-eyed daughter emerged as a confident young woman whose dreams were as boundless as the sky she so loved. This was Ebony Williams, the child of humble beginnings, nurtured by love and determination, armed with a vision that would soon take her to unimaginable heights. Little did she know that her future would not only impact her own life trajectory, but would also serve as a beacon of possibility to countless others. All she needed was a chance to prove herself, and Ebony was more than ready to seize every opportunity. After her stellar performance in high school, Ebony enrolled at Georgia State University, where she excelled academically. Her charisma and unwavering dedication quickly caught the attention of professors and peers alike. She participated in case study competitions, joined the aviation club, and became president of the Black Student Business Organization. In every role, she showcased her ability to lead, organize, and negotiate. Employers noticed this, and her resume shone like a supernova in a sea of average portfolios. During her sophomore year, she landed a part-time job with one of the regional airlines operating out of Hartsfield-Jackson. The job was humble customer service at the check-in counter and sometimes assisting in the lounge, but Ebony treated it like a golden opportunity. She used every interaction with passengers as a learning experience, carefully noting areas where processes could be improved. She listened to travelers' complaints and solutions they suggested, meticulously documenting her insights in a small, dog-eared notebook she carried everywhere. That same year, Ebony caught the attention of a visiting executive named Harold Schultz. He was a director of operations for a major airline alliance, which included several legacy carriers around the globe. Schultz was in town to evaluate how the regional airline integrated with its international partners. While standing in line, he observed Ebony deftly handling a disgruntled passenger who was late for a flight. Instead of dismissing the traveler's anxieties or showing annoyance, Ebony calmly listened, offered immediate support, and then rebooked them on a later flight, taking extra steps to ensure the process was as smooth as possible. Impressed, Schultz introduced himself after the passenger left. He grilled her with questions about her background, her ambitions, and what she thought airlines could do better. Instead of delivering safe, scripted answers, Ebony spoke passionately about overhauling outdated policies and championing diversity in upper management. She mentioned Dr. Monica Floyd's advice and how representation in corporate leadership remained woefully lacking. Schultz was taken aback by her candor and, more importantly, by how informed and genuine she was. What Ebony didn't know was that Harold Schultz had a knack for spotting raw talent. He quietly kept track of her progress over the next 2 years, sending her occasional emails of encouragement and inviting her to small networking events. This mentorship opened doors for Ebony that few undergraduates could even dream of accessing. By the time graduation approached, Ebony had job offers from multiple airlines. The one she eventually chose was a prominent international carrier, specifically because they offered a management trainee program that promised accelerated growth for high-potential candidates. Over the next few years, Ebony rotated through various departments: finance, operations, marketing, and human resources. She soaked up knowledge like a sponge and delivered stellar results. When the airline faced challenges with staff retention in one of its major hubs, Ebony spearheaded an initiative to address employee grievances head-on, introducing mentorship programs and inclusive training sessions. Her success in that program thrust her into the spotlight. Soon, Ebony found herself fielding interviews with leading aviation publications. She began speaking at industry conferences, highlighting the importance of internal culture in delivering top-notch passenger experiences. Despite her growing influence, Ebony remained remarkably grounded. never forgetting her roots or the lessons her parents taught her, especially the importance of treating everyone with respect and kindness, regardless of their position. By the age of 30, Ebony had risen to the position of Vice President of Strategy and Development at a well-known airline based in Chicago. She was one of the youngest VPs in the company's history and one of the few black women in such a role across the entire industry. Her day-to-day life involved managing massive budgets, juggling high-stakes projects, and ensuring that every move was strategic. She reported directly to the CEO, and her input became crucial in shaping corporate decisions. Yet the more she advanced, the more she noticed the biases that Dr. Floyd had warned her about. In boardrooms, she was often the only person of color, let alone a black woman. Some colleagues undermined her expertise or casually dismissed her ideas until others rephrased them. Still, Ebony's confidence and track record spoke louder than any prejudice. Each time she was underestimated, she quietly delivered results so indisputable that skepticism withered. Still, her meteoric rise did not come without personal sacrifices. Long hours and constant travel left little room for a social life. Friends grew distant, relationships faltered, and even family reunions became rare occurrences. But Ebony understood that shaping the future of an industry meant devoting her full energy. She willingly accepted these sacrifices, keeping her eyes on the bigger picture. All the while, Ebony remained unwavering in her belief that every passenger deserved top-tier service and every employee deserved to be treated with dignity. She advocated for better mentorship programs and stronger diversity initiatives, forging alliances across different departments to push for these changes. Some called her a maverick, others saw her as a future icon in the industry. Ebony never concerned herself with titles as long as she could make real, lasting impact. This unbreakable commitment to excellence and compassion was about to collide with a situation she never expected, one that would test every principle she held dear and reveal just how deeply prejudice could run. She was days away from an eye-opening trip that would serve as both a challenge and a testament to everything she had become. It started with a single email from a global consultancy firm interested in Ebony's expertise. The firm, Bowman and Green, specialized in auditing corporate cultures and employee satisfaction for multinational companies. They were launching a pilot project examining how airlines handled diversity and inclusion at the ground staff level check-in counters, cabin crews, gate agents, and lounge administrators. They wanted Ebony's perspective as a key advisor because her name had become synonymous with progressive corporate strategies that bridged the gap between high-level policies and real-world implementation. Ebony agreed to sign on as an external consultant for the project, excited about the chance to elevate industry standards. However, there was a twist. She would need to perform unannounced site visits, traveling incognito to gauge the genuine experiences of passengers and staff. This would give the consultancy firm raw, unfiltered data to compare against official policy statements from airline headquarters. After receiving final approval from her own CEO, Ebony took a one-week leave, her first real break in nearly 2 years. The plan was to travel on a few different airlines, across various airports, and compile notes on everything from staff attitudes to cleanliness to conflict resolution. The trip wouldn't be glamorous. She would purposely choose cramped connecting flights, economy seating, and busy travel windows to see how staff managed under stress. For Ebony, it was a chance to return to the passenger side of things, to remind herself of the day-to-day experiences that her policies might affect. She decided to start with American Airlines, a carrier she knew well in terms of brand reputation, but had never evaluated as a passenger in any official capacity. Her chosen itinerary was a straightforward JFK to LAX flight in economy. intentionally scheduled on a peak travel day. Ebony's logic was simple. If a crew could maintain professionalism during one of the busiest travel windows, it spoke volumes about their training and leadership. She didn't alert anyone to her identity or her position. She booked the ticket under her full name, Ebony C. Williams, which was sufficiently common not to raise eyebrows. In preparation, she toned down her usual executive flair. Instead of a designer suit, she wore a comfortable sweater, a pair of jeans, and sneakers. She swapped her elegant rolling suitcase for a scuffed old carry-on bag. Ebony even tied her hair into a simple ponytail and wore minimal makeup. She wanted to blend in seamlessly, ensuring that the staff's behavior toward her was entirely authentic. On the morning of the flight, Ebony woke up at a small mid-range hotel near JFK. This was by choice. She avoided the typical upscale hotel suite her position might have provided. She needed the full, unvarnished experience. Plus, she liked the anonymity. It allowed her to people watch in the lobby, observing families, business travelers, and flight crews without drawing attention to herself. As she settled her bill at the front desk, Ebony felt an odd twinge of excitement mixed with apprehension. She had championed airline passenger experience from the top down for years, but there was always a buffer of executive privilege. Traveling without special status or pre-arranged CIP perks was a different world. There was no guaranteed lounge access, no personal assistance from corporate liaisons, no privileged seat selection. It was just Ebony and her single carry-on, navigating the chaos like any other traveler. When she reached the airport, that same electricity filled the air, the frenzy of moving crowds, the mechanical whir of luggage belts, flight announcements echoing overhead. A wave of nostalgia hit her. She remembered the days when she'd interned at Hartsfield-Jackson, helping passengers figure out gate assignments and lugging strollers up to counters. Despite her position now, part of Ebony still felt like that wide-eyed intern, enthralled by the majestic dance of aviation. But the day's events would serve as a harsh reminder that her optimism about the industry was sometimes overshadowed by employees who did not share her dedication to fairness and empathy. As she made her way toward the American Airlines check-in area, Ebony sensed a palpable tension in the air. She could see lines building, frustrations flaring, and staff rushing from one station to another. She overheard hurried conversations about delayed flights and newly mandated changes to carry-on policies. Something told her this was going to be a more challenging experience than she anticipated. Yet, she also recalled the times she had managed high-stress situations from a corporate vantage point. She'd always urged her teams to see challenges not as excuses to vent frustration at passengers, but as opportunities to demonstrate empathy and resilience. In her mind, no matter how chaotic it got, there was always a professional, respectful way to handle it. She wondered if her convictions would be validated or tested in the hours to come. Little did she know, she was about to walk straight into the crucible of arrogance and bias, an encounter that would shake her faith in everything she believed about progress in the airline industry. As Ebony stood in the snaking line for the economy check-in, she watched other travelers shuffle forward inch by inch. 2 employees were manning the American Airlines counters, each one appearing frazzled under the mounting pressure. One was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, while the other was a young man who looked barely out of college, his necktie slightly askew. Intermittently, a supervisor dressed in a blazer zipped between them, offering rushed answers and occasionally snapping instructions. Ebony noticed the tension climbing, especially when the lines stalled due to a technical glitch with the baggage scale. Passengers grumbled, the staff grew visibly impatient. Still, Ebony waited calmly, focusing on her surroundings. She was here to observe, after all. She'd heard plenty of stories from frustrated flyers, but she wanted real evidence of the staff's behavior. Unfortunately, She was about to receive more than enough. By the time Ebony reached the front, she approached the young male agent whose name tag read Tyler. He barely looked up from his computer. "Next," he muttered, tapping his keyboard impatiently. Ebony stepped forward and offered a polite smile. "Good morning," she said quietly, handing over her ID and confirmation number. Ebony Williams, traveling to Los Angeles. Tyler gave her ID a perfunctory glance. "Yeah, okay," he muttered. He scanned her details, then frowned at the screen as if something displeased him. "Where's your checked baggage?" Ebony gestured at her carry-on. "I'm only bringing this with me," she replied, lifting the bag for emphasis. "You're not allowed that size if you're not priority," Tyler said curtly, pointing to the metal bag sizer off to the side. His tone was condescending, as though he suspected she was trying to sneak something past him. "Actually, the dimensions meet the carry-on requirement," Ebony replied patiently. She walked over to the sizer and slipped the bag inside. Indeed, it fit without issue. Tyler rolled his eyes. "Fine," he said, as if granting her a favor. He began typing again. The entire time, he avoided eye contact, his voice tinged with a dismissive quality that Ebony found unsettling. He handed her boarding pass back, but before Ebony could even check it, he demanded, "Next passenger!" She lingered a second, wanting to see if he'd say anything else like a courteous farewell or a simple acknowledgement, but nothing came. Shrugging it off, Ebony decided to let it pass. She understood that check-in agents often dealt with stress. Maybe Tyler was just having a bad day. However, as she started to walk away, Tyler stopped her. "Wait, your bag looks heavy." "We have weight limits for carry-ons," he said, his voice suddenly louder. Ebony looked confused. "I'm aware of that. Should I weigh it?" He gestured to the scale dismissively. "It's probably overweight. If it is, you'll have to check it in and pay a fee." Ebony placed the bag on the scale, the digital numbers flashing. It was well within the limit. Sighing, Tyler gave a theatrically exasperated look. "All right, whatever," he said. "Just go." She took her bag and left, unsettled by the hostility she'd just experienced. Checking the boarding pass, she noted that she'd been placed in a middle seat, in one of the back rows, a typical experience for economy travelers. But it still felt odd that Tyler didn't even ask if she had a preference. In Ebony's experience, staff usually asked if you wanted an aisle or window seat, unless the flight was completely full. Pushing the interaction aside, Ebony reminded herself that she was here to observe every facet of the passenger journey, including less than ideal scenarios. She had plenty of airline employees under her supervision back in her own company, and she'd always stressed the importance of empathy and professionalism, no matter how hectic it got. A single surly agent didn't necessarily reflect the entire airline. As she walked towards security, Ebony overheard a confrontation at another nearby counter. A black family with 2 young children was pleading for help because their flight was oversold and they'd just been bumped. The staff member, an older gentleman, spoke to them in a tone that was at best dismissive and at worst downright condescending. He blamed them for arriving too late, even though it was still an hour until departure. Ebony noticed an unsettling pattern. The staff seemed to exhibit a particular impatience whenever dealing with black passengers. It was a red flag she couldn't ignore. Mentally, she noted the time and place, determined to document the incident for her report. This was exactly the type of behavior she hoped to eradicate. Ebony tried to intervene subtly, approaching the family and suggesting they might speak with a supervisor. But before she could get too involved, she was ushered onward by a security officer managing passenger flow. She looked back once, making sure the family at least had the agent's undivided attention. Still, a sinking feeling gnawed at her. The day had only just begun, and Ebony sensed trouble brewing. She only hoped the flight crew would be more compassionate than the ground staff. With her boarding pass in hand, Ebony entered the security checkpoint, her heart heavier than she expected. This was the very real, very frustrating environment that everyday passengers faced, and the reason she was committed to improving airline cultures. Nevertheless, she had no idea how personal it would soon become, nor how dramatic the fallout would be. Once her identity came to light, after navigating the security lines, Ebony made her way toward her assigned gate, which was already crowded with people waiting to board. Flight delays were posted on the screen. An earlier flight to Chicago was running late, and that bottleneck seemed to be causing a ripple effect across subsequent departures. Passengers were sprawled on the floor, huddled in chairs, or pacing back and forth, looking harried and exasperated. The gate agents were furiously typing into their terminals, answering a barrage of questions from every direction. Ebony found a seat in a less congested corner near a window. She opened her notepad, jotting down the morning's experiences, the tense check-in process, Tyler's dismissive attitude, and the situation with the black family who got bumped. She also detailed the general atmosphere, how staff morale seemed low, how none of the employees she'd encountered thus far made an effort to extend basic courtesies. She wanted to be thorough in her observations, knowing her report to Bowman and Green would hold more weight if backed by concrete examples. As Ebony was writing, she noticed a sudden commotion at the gate counter. A slender, impeccably dressed gate agent name tag reading Michelle was confronting a passenger about their oversized carry-on. The passenger was a middle-aged white businessman, and he clearly had missed an earlier flight. "I've flown with you guys for years," he barked, slamming a silver luggage bag onto the counter. "Don't you know who I am? I'm Executive Platinum." Michelle forced a smile. "Sir, we appreciate your loyalty, but the overhead bins are limited. If your bag doesn't fit, we'll have to gate check it." The man continued to argue, raising his voice so everyone could hear. He threatened to take his business to another airline, demanded an upgrade for his trouble, and insisted someone should carry his bag on board for him. Michelle, visibly stressed, tried to remain calm, repeating the rules about carry-on size and urging him to follow protocol. It was a clear power play, fueled by the passenger's sense of entitlement. Normally, Ebony would have sympathized with the gate agent, who was simply doing her job in the face of unreasonable demands. But what caught Ebony's attention was Michelle's deference. Despite the businessman's rude behavior, Michelle kept her tone gentle, almost apologetic. She printed him a new boarding pass with a potential upgrade to an exit row seat, though there was no official policy stating that was required. In short, Michelle went above and beyond to placate the man's ego. The difference in tone struck Ebony. When the black family with the 2 children had an issue, the staff response was cold, dismissive. Yet here was this man, being borderline abusive, and the gate agent was offering him additional perks, apparently to keep him satisfied. It was a glaring double standard. Ebony's heart sank. She wrote down every detail she observed. She was no stranger to how unconscious and sometimes conscious biases could manifest in customer service. But witnessing it so blatantly, in real time, was jarring. How many other travelers faced similar biases every day without the platform or the means to challenge it? She continued to watch Michelle. Soon after the businessman walked away, Michelle flagged down a different black passenger, a woman in her late 20s, who was carrying a baby, and told her curtly that she needed to check her stroller immediately or risk losing her place in line. The woman nodded meekly, hurrying off to find the right area to check her stroller. There was no kindness, no empathy, just an impatient wave of the hand from Michelle. It was becoming more apparent that Ebony was witnessing a pattern, one that rattled her sense of fairness and equality. Could it be a coincidence? Possibly. But Ebony had seen enough corporate environments to suspect that such consistent disparities weren't random. They often stemmed from an institutional culture that tolerated or even normalized biased behavior. A loudspeaker announcement interrupted Ebony's thoughts. Passengers on American Airlines Flight 268 to Los Angeles, please note that boarding will begin in 30 minutes. Ebony glanced at the time. The flight was still on schedule, surprisingly, despite the chaos around them. Suddenly, Michelle noticed Ebony and frowned, as if annoyed by her quiet presence. She approached Ebony, scanning her carry-on with critical eyes. "Ma'am, do you have a seat assignment?" Ebony nodded, producing her boarding pass. "Yes, 29E. Michelle took the pass." Her lips pursed. "You need to be ready when we call Group 7. Please don't line up early, okay? We're trying to maintain some order here." Her tone wasn't quite rude, but it was hardly cordial, either more of a warning than an offer of assistance. Ebony forced a polite smile, resisting the urge to flash her high-level credentials or mention her extensive experience in airline operations. "I understand. I'll wait until my group is called." Without further ado, Michelle walked away. Ebony sighed, trying to maintain her composure. She told herself it wasn't worth creating a scene. She was here as an observer, to gather data on how the average passenger was treated. And so far, it was sobering. The gate area was rife with tension, selective courtesy, and borderline hostility. She looked around again, noticing how few smiles were exchanged among staff and passengers. The overhead announcements sounded like monotone lectures, lacking any warmth. Employees hustled back and forth, each seemingly overwhelmed. None of this mirrored the friendly skies image airlines liked to promote. Drawing a deep breath, Ebony resolved to keep her spirits high. This was exactly why she'd agreed to do these site visits, so the truth couldn't be glossed over by marketing campaigns or polished training manuals. But as she would soon discover, the real test of her character and the airline's culture was just around the corner, waiting for her the moment she stepped onto the plane. Sitting in the busy terminal, Ebony found her mind drifting back to the conferences she'd attended and the accolades she had received for championing diversity and equality in the aviation sector. It almost felt surreal that she was experiencing firsthand a level of bias and discourtesy that her team had worked so hard to eliminate in her own airline. She recalled the day she was honored with the Aviation Innovator Award at the annual Global Airline Summit in Singapore, an event attended by CEOs, department heads, and industry veterans from around the world. In her acceptance speech, she highlighted the critical need for inclusive employee training, fair hiring practices, and unwavering respect for passengers, regardless of race or social status. The audience had erupted into applause, many executives nodding in agreement and praising her forward-thinking approach. Yet now, as she watched the swirl of prejudiced interactions at JFK, she wondered if those executives truly internalized her message or merely clapped for public relations optics. Her mind wandered further back, to one of the defining moments of her career. She had been tasked with turning around a failing regional hub notorious for poor customer reviews and high employee turnover. Staff morale was abysmal. Gate agents frequently clashed with passengers. Flight attendants felt unsupported by management. The community around the hub had a sour opinion of the airline as a whole. Ebony, then just promoted to a director-level position, threw herself into the challenge. She spent weeks talking to frontline employees, not from the comfort of an office, but literally walking the terminals, riding crew shuttles, and even joining early morning ramp checks. She asked one basic question: what can be done better here? Employees at first were skeptical of her sincerity, but slowly they opened up. They told her about outdated scheduling systems, unrealistic workload expectations, and favoritism from supervisors. Ebony listened intently, bringing these insights back to her own leadership. She then fought tooth and nail to secure the budget for better technology, more training, and a system of anonymous feedback that allowed employees to speak freely without fear of retaliation. Over the course of a year, the hub's performance metrics soared. Customer satisfaction went up, turnover decreased significantly, and even the local press wrote glowing articles about how the airline was transforming its culture. Ebony became a household name in her company, someone who had not only identified the problems, but effectively bridged the gap between corporate leadership and frontline employees. Yet here she was, experiencing the very scenarios she had spent years trying to rectify in her own airline. The irony wasn't lost on her. The flight she was about to board would be a litmus test, not just for American Airlines culture, but also for her personal resolve. Could she maintain her composure, document the issues, and approach them methodically? Or would the indignities she had already faced spark righteous anger, making her lash out and risk her incognito status? It was a question that made her heart pound a little faster. Ebony wasn't one to shy away from conflict, but she also knew that confronting staff in the heat of the moment would likely backfire, especially if they didn't know who she was. They'd see just another black woman refusing to know her place, as far too many biased individuals might assume. That thought alone, how easy it was for an employee or fellow passenger to reduce her to a stereotype, both saddened and steeled her resolve. She checked the time. Boarding was set to begin in about 10 minutes. People were already forming lines around the roped-off boarding area, even though no official announcement had been made. Despite Michelle's earlier instructions, a few passengers from later groups had queued up early, hoping to secure overhead bin space before it ran out. Ebony stayed seated, determined to follow the instructions she'd been given, even if it meant risking no space for her bag. She wanted to see how the gate staff handled the boarding chaos. In these final moments of waiting, Ebony closed her eyes and reminded herself why she'd embarked on this journey in the first place, to spark real change. The data she gathered today, every snub, every biased action, could be turned into fuel for reform. A small fire of indignation smoldered inside her chest, growing with each memory of the disrespect she and others had endured. This was her life's work, to shine a light on these injustices and pave the way for a more equitable future in aviation. She had the experience, the influence, and now the first-hand accounts to catalyze change. The question was, would American Airlines realize who they'd messed with before it was too late? Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we will begin our boarding process for flight 268 to Los Angeles. We ask that passengers needing extra assistance and those traveling with small children come forward first, the gate agent announced. Ebony observed a few passengers with children and mobility aids make their way to the gate. Then came first class and priority boarding. Finally, they called groups 5 and 6. Ebony's group 7 was next, so she rose from her seat and approached the line cautiously. Michelle stood at the boarding door with a scanner. When Ebony reached her, she offered the boarding pass with a polite nod. "Group 7, Ebony Williams," Ebony said softly. Michelle scanned the pass and waved her on without a word. Another passenger behind Ebony, an older white woman, handed Michelle a pass that was for Group 9. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Michelle said apologetically. "We're not boarding Group 9 yet, but go ahead this time." Ebony couldn't help but note the difference in treatment. The older woman was also in the wrong group, yet Michelle was still gracious enough to let her pass. Meanwhile, Ebony had been sternly instructed not to board early just moments ago. The disparity stung. Walking through the jet bridge, Ebony felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Part of her still hoped the flight crew would be more courteous, more aligned with the values the airline publicly proclaimed. She took a moment to adjust her carry-on and mentally prepare for any potential challenges. Once on board, she followed the aisle toward row 29. The cabin was bustling with people trying to stow their luggage. Flight attendants were directing traffic, but some passengers looked irritated, especially as overhead bins began to fill up. Ebony spotted her seat, a cramped middle spot between a scowling man in the window seat and a young woman in the aisle seat, both already settled. As she hefted her carry-on to place it in the overhead bin, she discovered it was nearly full. The scowling man sighed audibly, as if Ebony's mere presence was an inconvenience. She tried to slide her bag in, but it wouldn't fit easily. A flight attendant, her name tag reading Kelly, noticed Ebony's struggle. "Could you please hurry?" Kelly asked, her tone borderline exasperated. "We have a lot of passengers behind you trying to get past." Ebony forced a tight smile. "I'm doing my best," she replied, carefully maneuvering her bag until it fit into the last corner of the compartment. She quickly slipped into her seat, apologizing to the aisle passenger for making her stand. Once seated, Ebony tried to settle in and gather her thoughts. She pulled out her notepad, intending to jot down some notes. That's when Kelly approached again, eyebrows raised. "Ma'am, all carry-ons must be stowed in the overhead bin or under the seat in front of you for takeoff," she said, pointing at Ebony's small purse at her feet. Ebony calmly explained that it was just her purse and that it would fit under the seat, but Kelly cut her off. "I need you to store it properly and do it quickly. Our flight is already behind schedule." With that, Kelly pivoted and walked away, not even giving Ebony a chance to respond. Ebony's seatmates exchanged knowing glances, as if they, too, noticed Kelly's brusque manner. Ebony tucked her purse beneath the seat and took a deep breath, reminding herself to remain professional, even if she wasn't being treated as such. Minutes later, the cabin doors closed and the safety demonstration commenced. Ebony observed the flight attendants who went through the motions mechanically. She wondered how many times a day they repeated this routine and whether boredom or burnout might be feeding into their attitudes. Still, it didn't excuse the unkindness. As the plane taxied, Ebony leaned back in her seat, mentally cataloguing each microaggression. Tyler's snippy remarks at check-in, Michelle's selective courtesy at the gate, and now Kelly's curt instructions. It was a pattern that, while subtle in some instances, clearly indicated a level of disrespect. Ebony couldn't help but think of passengers who might not have her resilience or her insider knowledge. How would they feel facing such treatment? Once the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Flight attendants began the in-flight service. Kelly and another attendant pushed a cart down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. When they reached Ebony's row, Kelly handed a bag of pretzels to the window seat passenger and a soft drink. She did the same for the aisle passenger, smiling politely. Then she reached Ebony without making eye contact and extended a bag of pretzels and a plastic cup with watery soda. "Thank you," Ebony said, trying to keep her tone pleasant, but Kelly was already moving on. Ebony noticed that the two other passengers in her row had been asked if they preferred peanuts or pretzels, while she had simply been handed pretzels without a choice. It was a small thing, but it contributed to an ever-growing list of slights. As Ebony sipped her soda, a commotion near the front of the cabin drew her attention. A passenger was complaining about the overhead bin being opened and his belongings shifting during turbulence. The flight attendant apologized profusely and even offered the passenger bonus miles for the inconvenience. Ebony raised an eyebrow. Clearly, some passengers got the red carpet treatment. She wondered if that same generosity would have been extended to her. She wrote a few more lines in her notepad, noticing her heart pounding more heavily than before. It was one thing to suspect systemic issues. It was another to experience them up close. stacked one after another. The flight wore on, and Ebony tried to distract herself by reading an article on her tablet, ironically about corporate ethics in large organizations. A short while before landing, Ebony witnessed Kelly once more being especially attentive to certain passengers again, mostly those who appeared affluent or who spoke with an air of authority. Some were offered extra snacks or a second drink, yet when Ebony quietly asked for a refill of her soda, Kelly sighed, as if Ebony's request was a burdensome afterthought. There it was again, that subtle but undeniable tone that said, "You're not as important as the others." Ebony's frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior. She could already foresee how this flight would be described in her report, an overwhelming example of staff failing to deliver consistent courtesy. As the plane began its descent, Ebony closed her eyes and steadied her breathing. She needed to maintain her composure. She wasn't just another disgruntled passenger. She was a highly influential executive with the power to drive meaningful change. If she lost her temper now, it would only play into harmful stereotypes and potentially undermine her mission. But as she'd soon discover, fate had more twists in store, moments that would push her patience to the limit and reveal a side of these airline employees she hadn't yet seen. After a bumpy landing at Los Angeles International Airport, Ebony exhaled a sigh of relief. Her flight had been less than pleasant, but she was grateful to finally be on solid ground. The plane taxied to the gate, and the seatbelt sign blinked off. Passengers jumped up, grabbing bags from overhead compartments. Ebony patiently waited her turn, not wanting to elbow her way into the fray. She noticed that Kelly seemed less rushed now that they were on the ground. The flight attendant was chatting with a couple in first class, smiling warmly as she helped them retrieve their belongings. Ebony shook her head slightly. The disparity in treatment was impossible to ignore. When she finally stepped into the jet bridge, Ebony saw Tyler, the check-in agent from JFK, standing there. Having hopped onto this flight as a crew traveler, or possibly to assist in some capacity upon arrival. He was conversing with Michelle. Both locked eyes with Ebony as she emerged. Michelle snickered under her breath, whispering something to Tyler. Ebony caught a mocking glance and felt a flush of irritation. She almost wanted to call them out, but she forced herself to remain calm. Ebony walked into the terminal, following signs toward baggage claim, though she had no checked bag. She was scheduled to catch a connecting flight to another city for her next round of observations, but had a layover of several hours. She figured she might check out an airline lounge or find a quiet corner to compose her notes. That's when she heard someone call her name. Turning around, Ebony spotted Harold Schultz, her old mentor from the Airline Alliance, who just so happened to be passing through LAX on his way to another conference. He was dressed in a casual suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. "Ebony, is that really you?" Harold asked, eyes lighting up. A genuine smile spread across Ebony's face. "Harold, what are you doing here?" she asked, stepping forward to greet him with a handshake. "I'm on my way to a meeting, but never mind that," Harold said, grinning. "I haven't seen you in months." "Still conquering the airline world?" Ebony laughed. "Trying my best." Just then Tyler and Michelle walked by, pushing a trolley of supplies for the gate area. Harold, who recognized them from earlier interactions in the industry, stopped them. "Michelle Tyler, right? Good to see you again," he said enthusiastically. Michelle looked startled. Hello, Mr. Schultz," she replied, trying to maintain composure. Tyler seemed equally taken aback, clearly not expecting to run into a high-ranking figure from the Airline Alliance. Harold continued, "I'd like you both to meet Ebony Williams. She's a top executive in the aviation industry. Well, I'll let her fill you in on her exact role. Let me just say, she's one of the brightest stars we have, pushing for better passenger experiences and diversity across the board." He beamed with pride as he introduced Ebony. Immediately, Ebony saw Tyler and Michelle's expressions shift. Their eyes widened in recognition. Tyler quickly recalled their unpleasant check-in exchange. Michelle's face paled, probably remembering the gate-side interaction. They exchanged nervous glances, as if trying to figure out how to respond. Ebony's stomach twisted. She hadn't planned on revealing her identity like this, especially not to these particular staff members who had treated her so poorly. But fate had intervened. She forced a polite smile, nodding in acknowledgement. "Nice to formally meet you both," she said, softly, her tone neutral. Harold, oblivious to the tension, continued cheerfully. "Ebony is a leading consultant on corporate culture and passenger satisfaction. Our alliance has gleaned invaluable insights from her research. If anyone can transform an airline's reputation, it's her." He turned to Ebony. "Are you heading to a meeting here at LAX?" Before Ebony could answer, Michelle spoke up in a shaky voice. I'm so sorry, Miss Williams. We didn't realize." She trailed off, fidgeting with the handle of the trolley. Tyler swallowed hard, stepping forward. "Yes, Miss Williams, we hope your flight was, satisfactory," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Is there anything we can assist you with?" Ebony could feel Harold's gaze flick between them, sensing something was off. She decided to speak diplomatically. "I appreciate the offer," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But no, thank you. I'm just heading to my next connection." She considered leaving it at that, but a flicker of indignation urged her to say more. She shifted her focus to Michelle and Tyler. "Though, if I'm being honest, my experience on this journey wasn't what I would call exemplary." Harold raised an eyebrow. "Oh, is there a concern we should address?" Michelle opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tyler's face reddened. Ebony took a measured breath and responded, "It's fine, Harold. I'll file a detailed report through the appropriate channels." She then looked directly at Tyler and Michelle. "I would hope next time all passengers, regardless of how they look, receive the same courtesy and respect. You might show an elite traveler." A moment of awkward silence followed. Michelle started stammering an apology, but Ebony held up her hand gently, indicating they could save it. She didn't want a superficial apology. She wanted genuine change. Harold cleared his throat, clearly picking up on the tension but unsure how to proceed. Ebony broke the silence with a small nod. "I need to get going." "Harold, always good to see you. Let's catch up soon." She turned to Tyler and Michelle again. "Have a good day." She walked away, heart pounding. The irony was almost too much revealed at the exact moment she hadn't intended, in front of the very staff who had shown her the worst side of customer service. Yet maybe this was the perfect outcome. Perhaps now they would think twice about treating people with prejudice or disdain. Harold hurried after Ebony. "That was interesting," he said softly. "Did something happen I should know about?" Ebony exhaled, nodding. "Something did, but I'd like to handle it through official channels. For now, let's just say they treated me differently than other passengers and not in a pleasant way." Harold placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Understood. Let me know if you need any support." With that, they parted ways. Ebony headed to a quiet lounge in a different concourse, her mind spinning. She felt a mixture of vindication, anger, and sadness. The karmic reveal of her identity might ensure those staff members faced consequences, but she knew the problem was bigger than just Michelle, Tyler, or Kelly. It was woven into the culture of the airline, possibly enabled by neglectful leadership and flawed training. She was determined to shine a brighter spotlight on these issues. And now, with her identity out in the open, there would be no place for the staff or the airline's management to hide. 2 days later, Ebony sat in her San Francisco hotel room, finalizing notes for Bowman and Green. Word had traveled fast. American Airlines managers bombarded her with emails, eager to address her complaints before they escalated. Yet Ebony refused to settle for empty apologies. She wanted genuine reform. Soon her phone rang, Jana Lee, the airline's VP of Customer Experience, called with an apology and a proposal. They needed Ebony's insight to overhaul training, root out biases, and establish accountability. Ebony agreed, but only if they committed to real change, no quick fixes or half measures. Jana promised support. Meanwhile, stories swirled on internal message boards. Some employees recalled negative run-ins with Tyler, Michelle, and Kelly, confirming Ebony's account. Others dismissed her as overreacting. Ebony ignored the gossip and focused on the bigger picture. Before long, Tyler was pulled from customer-facing duties. Michelle went on a performance plan. Kelly received a reprimand. None were fired outright, something Ebony actually supported, hoping thorough training could transform them. By evening, she sent her final report to Bowman and Green, detailing every incident from check-in to landing. Data, timestamps, and witness statements underscored the need for comprehensive reforms. A quick text from her mentor, Harold, lifted her spirits. "Proud of you. Keep fighting for what's right." Though aware that promises often slip through corporate cracks, Ebony felt renewed purpose. If airlines truly cared about their bottom line and brand reputation, they'd recognize that equity and empathy were non-negotiable. And if they failed to act, she stood ready to hold them accountable. A month later, Ebony found herself in a sleek conference room at American Airlines headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas. Senior executives filled the space, among them the CEO, CFO, and Jana Lee from Customer Experience, all there to hear Ebony's findings. Some faces looked defensive, others intrigued. Ebony's presentation highlighted every issue she'd witnessed, from inconsistent enforcement of carry-on policies to overt racial bias. She showed data from Bowman and Green's audit that backed up her personal experiences. Certain passenger demographics routinely reported lower satisfaction, and frontline employees admitted feeling ill, prepared to handle tense interactions. When she finished, the room fell silent. The CEO, Richard Coleman, cleared his throat. "Miss Williams, we appreciate your candor. We must address these shortcomings." Jana nodded, adding that they'd already begun implementing upgraded training modules. The CFO, Marcia Edwards, voiced concern over costs. "A thorough overhaul staffing, training, enforcement requires heavy investment," she cautioned. Ebony responded calmly. "The return on that investment is long-term loyalty, reduced turnover, and fewer incidents that damage reputation. It pays off in both moral and financial terms." A murmur of agreement spread through the group. The CEO exhaled. "All right, we'll commit resources to fix this. Jana, you'll lead with Ebony's guidance if she's willing." "I am," Ebony affirmed. "But understand that results won't appear overnight. Consistent follow-through is essential." The meeting ended on a note of cautious optimism. As Ebony packed up her materials, the CEO shook her hand, promising to keep her updated. Outside the conference room, Tyler and Michelle stood waiting. Their faces reflected both regret and relief. Michelle approached first. "I'm sorry, Miss Williams. I was out of line." Tyler nodded. "I need to do better. No excuses." Ebony gave a forgiving smile. "Apology accepted. Remember, respect shouldn't depend on status or appearance." They both nodded earnestly. Weeks later, American Airlines released a public statement confirming its commitment to better service and diversity training. Opinions online were mixed. Skeptics doubted the airline's sincerity, while others lauded Ebony's bravery. Still, Ebony felt hopeful. She had turned a moment of personal humiliation into a chance for meaningful industry change. That, to her, was genuine leadership. Thank you for joining me on this dramatic journey, where a routine flight turned into a powerful lesson on empathy, integrity, and perseverance. If there's one takeaway from Ebony's experience, it's that our everyday actions and the biases we harbor can shape a person's entire journey. Yet, as we've seen, the real power lies in standing up for what's right, using our voices to push for meaningful change. If this story resonated with you, please remember to hit that like button. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder about the importance of respect, and subscribe for more stories that challenge our everyday assumptions. Together, let's build a community rooted in fairness, understanding, and the courage to do better. After all, a single voice can spark change, but a collective chorus can transform industries and lives. Until next time, stay inspired